Thank you to everyone at WageStream for their continued support of Retail Trust. I'm now thrilled to introduce Andrea Woodside, who began her career in wellbeing at work 28 years ago. Andrea has worked with a wide range of industries to support employers to tackle mental health stigma in the workplace, create sustainable solutions for safeguarding their people's well-being, and design programs which encourage recovery from emotional distress. Andrea has also provided wellbeing consultancy to Retail Trust since 2012 and is well positioned to understand the unique needs and challenges of today's retailers. Where COVID-19 is concerned, we are all having a normal reaction to an abnormal event, but maintaining our mental wellness isn't always easy, especially when we're looking after others. Learn how to take a step back, gain perspective, and give yourself the very best chance of staying well, focused, and optimistic.
Hi, my name is Andrea Woodside. I'm the lead trainer at Retail Trust. I've been in the workplace wellbeing business for coming up on 28 years. And although COVID has taken away a lot from a lot of us, one thing it has given us, I think, is the ability to talk more openly and freely about how we're experiencing this whole pandemic and how we're feeling. So I would say that although it's taken away a lot, it's given us an amazing opportunity to have more open and honest conversations with each other about how we're doing. And that's hence for the four. All of us are affected. All of us have, times where we're struggling and we're not feeling so great. But the point is that together, I think we can really change the narrative. I'm going to start off by just letting you know, or reminding you, if you already know this, that we're having a normal reaction to an abnormal experience. This is exactly what's happening. There is no right or wrong way to feel or think or behave during this time. We're simply having a normal reaction to an abnormal experience. So I think it's also helpful to recognize that your track record of getting through stuff, difficult times, whatever those are, whatever those have been in the past for you, is 100%. So if your track record is 100% so far, let's keep it that way. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what COVID-19 has raised for our retail colleagues. And I think you could argue that this is across the board, both in retail and outside. The highs are higher and the lows are lower. And I think it's an important kind of thing to keep in mind that our behavior, how we have acclimatized to this, is quite frankly a little bit like a pendulum. So when a pendulum first starts to swing, you'll notice that it arcs. So it will go up to the very highest and again down, finding its way through and again up to its highest point. So what it does is it takes time for the pendulum to stop swinging to such extremes. So what this means is that we're all on a different path. It's taking us different amounts of time to find our sort of normalized, balanced point. So for the moment, the highs are higher and the lows are lower. And I don't want anybody to think that this points to having a mental health problem necessarily. This is, I think, just a very human reaction to how we're coping with this incredible change. We're also, unfortunately, very sadly, seeing increased customer agitation. That will come as no surprise to any of you, I'm sure. One of the things that I'm talking to retail colleagues about is making sure that nobody on a shift leaves for the day without having had a good bit of time with their manager or deputy or even a colleague to sort of talk through what that's raised for them. Nobody likes to be abused. Nobody deserves to be abused. But unfortunately, it is happening as we speak. So one of the things I would say is the top tip to protect all of our well-being is to make sure that nobody leaves a shift without having had that moment to just kind of express their disappointment or their concern or their sadness or their fear. Also want to talk about the Titanic effect. So the night the Titanic went down, as we have all heard about in history, close to 2,000 people were left without a lifeboat, and that was a tragedy in itself. One of the things that happened was you had a couple of thousand people swimming through dark, freezing cold waters, sometimes for hours before help came. And what was really interesting was that a sizable number of these people who, once they got to a place of safety, actually, they didn't just sort of rest and relax. They died. So it's an interesting thing to think about somebody spending hours against all odds, swimming for their life, not knowing where they were going, not knowing when it was going to end, using everything they possibly had in them to survive, only get to a place of safety to die. Now, this is an interesting thing. How does the Titanic effect relate to retail? Well, back in 2003 during SARS, I saw this. In 2008-9 during the big recession, and we're seeing it now during COVID, this pandemic. So what we're seeing, particularly in retail, I'm not seeing it as much in other sectors, but particularly in retail, we're seeing people who are coming to work when they shouldn't be. So in other words, what this means is, despite COVID, we still have those day-to-day, if you will, illnesses such as migraine, bronchitis, flu, dental abscesses, gastro problems, etc. So what we're seeing is people are still coming to work despite those. So we've got people who are coming to work in retail and actually pushing through. So they're ignoring the fact that they're not feeling well, and they continue to come to work. So as a result, in retail on the whole, absenteeism rates are lower. And this is what has happened, as I mentioned, during SARS back in 2003 and again in 2008-9, it's happening again. Now, what this means is if people are coming to work when they shouldn't be, they should be at home in bed recovering as they usually would pre-COVID. What this means is by the time COVID is over, whether that's 6 weeks, 6 months, or who knows, 6 years, then they will have actually used pretty much all they have, and they will be ripe for burnout. So the point is if we keep going against all odds, using every available resource to get through it, we will get to a point where we will burn out. And we saw this again back in the day. We will see absenteeism rates rise. Now, what can we do to mitigate this? What can we do today is to make sure that our people are taking their breaks, that they're taking their time off, that if they're not well enough to be at work, whether they're working from home or in an office, it doesn't matter. If they are working when they shouldn't be, then we're actually just delaying their healing. And ultimately that will mean that absenteeism rates will rise exponentially once the COVID lifeboat, meaning the end of COVID, comes. So it's really important to make sure that we're looking after ourselves, but also our people. And of course, no surprise, we're seeing an increase in self-diagnosis with mental health problems. So these are people who are coming to their managers and saying, I have, X, Y, Z, and there is sometimes a reluctance to seek professional help. Our best advice to you is to ensure that all of us who are hearing from somebody who is saying they have a mental health problem but hasn't actually had help yet, hasn't seen a doctor, i.e. their GP, it's incredibly important that we encourage them gently and compassionately to do that. Instead of saying you should see the doctor, what we suggest you say is, does your GP know how you're feeling? Because you're not telling them to go and see the doctor, but you're also validating their experience of being in emotional pain. And of course, it would be a natural thing to go and seek some professional support for that. So again, don't let that slide. Take it very seriously indeed. Whether somebody has a mental health problem or not is not the point. The point is that this person is in pain. And what we need to do as employers is to stand as the conduit between that person's distress, whether it's a mental health problem or not, and professional signposting, and to do that as quickly as we possibly can. So a lot of people are talking about, stress as an illness. And I think, we still have this prevailing view in society where stress is an illness. And as this health and safety executive pointed out nearly 20 years ago, and this explanation still stands, it's not an illness, it is a state. Now, the point is, if it becomes too excessive and prolonged, then mental health problems and physical illnesses may develop. So there's an old adage, you can't heal from a burn by staying in the fire. And the paradox of stress is the more stressed we are, the less we notice is actually going on around us. So we don't tend to notice that we're in a bad place. Now keep in mind, we have to be under stress for a prolonged period of time for some of these things to develop. But then again, what is a prolonged period of time? We've already been in this for 7 months. And that is quite a lengthy journey for us. So what I would say is we're probably wise to start to notice what our own signs are. So one of the things you can do is really examine, how do you behave? How do you feel when you're in a bad place? At that point, it's when you know that you can step back and do something to either eradicate that source of stress, or if that's not possible, to kind of reduce it a little bit. This is why self-care is an incredibly important thing at this point. We go back to the Titanic effect to sort of think about, if we're not looking after ourselves now, then we're going to get sick in whatever way that's going to look like. So our insurance policy right now is to make sure that we are not sitting in the fire, that we're stepping away. Otherwise, we can't heal from the burn. So what influences how different people cope with stress? Well, I mean, this is a huge question, and we could be here, I'm sure, for hours talking to lots and lots of people about different influences. But I think one of the things that I've noticed in my career is that people become very fixated on behaviors. So we look at behavior, whether that's being late to work or AWOL or somebody getting very verbally aggressive with us, whatever that might be. That's simply the behavior. We have no hope of helping somebody to change that behavior until we isolate and identify and support them with the drivers. So some of the drivers that I'm seeing, particularly due to COVID, is financial difficulties. So we're seeing lots of people who are very, very anxious about their financial futures. And that's going to cause a huge amount of stress. So we might not know about it because we still treat money as a very private matter, fair enough. But unless we know about it, we can't help that person to get the right support. Other people might be dealing with multiple caring demands, which is going to be causing them a huge amount of difficulties. Other people are living with chronic pain, and we don't necessarily know about it. We might be looking at people who are living lifestyles that aren't necessarily conducive to living a healthy life where we're mentally in a good place. So these might be people who are drinking quite a lot of alcohol. These might be people who are living on caffeine and sugar to get through the day. The point about this is that what influences how different people cope with stress is something that we need to always look at, and you won't know until you ask. So this is where the beginning of those really good conversations come from. With empathy, compassion, we can sit down with somebody and say, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? Is there anything we can help with? And by teasing out their full story, those 90% of drivers that you're not seeing, you can then act as the conduit between what's happening for them, whether that's a practical or emotional issue, and professional support. So don't discount the drivers. Don't just always focus on the behaviors. It's really important that we understand what the drivers are, because unless we know what they are, we can't signpost effectively. So there's a couple of tools that I want to talk to you about now. And these can be used on your own. They can be used with family and friends, and they can certainly be used with teams. I think the main thing that we need to recognize here again is that we're having a normal reaction to an abnormal event. Nobody has ever lived through this before. None of us really know what's going on, if we're honest, when it's going to end and what's going to happen next. But the point is, I think when we feel empowered and that we have control, even over the smallest of things, then we're in a much better place. So I want to talk to you about Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman is an amazing man. He's worth looking up. So after this session, you may wish to look his work up. One of the things he talks about is the 3 Ps of resilience. And the 3 Ps of resilience really, when we look at these 3 Ps, it can actually define how well or how well we don't get through an adverse life event. So that might be a relationship breakdown. It could be a serious illness. It could be a pandemic. It could be any number of things. So I just offer this as a sort of really interesting, useful tool. Keep in mind, too, that I've used this with children as young as 10. So I think the point is that, 10-year-olds are pretty smart, and so are adults. So we can take a page out of their book and actually recognize that this is an accessible tool for everyone. So the first question Martin Seligman suggests we ask ourselves is this situation personal? Is it all my fault? We tend to get stuck in life as human beings when we take too much of the blame on ourselves. And that starts that spiral of not feeling very good about ourselves, not liking ourselves, etc. So one of the things he talks about is saying, I can't take responsibility for other people's actions, only my own. So again, you could apply this to a relationship breakdown, a bereavement, debt problem with your kids, or indeed the pandemic. So one of the things that Martin Seligman is talking about is when we think, when we can sort of absolve ourselves from full responsibility for anything that's going around us, such as a bereavement or a relationship breakdown or that kind of thing, then we'll fare better. He then talks about pervasive. Now, this is a really key point here, because when we feel that all areas of our life, without exception, are affected by a particular problem, then that's when we're going to start to lose hope. And the reality is that there is always some area of our life that remains under our control, regardless of what's going on around us. So the question that he's asking us to ask, and I think is important, is it true that all areas of your life are affected? Because I will guarantee you that there will always be at least one area over which you have control. And finally, he talks about permanent. Nothing is forever. COVID is not forever. The pain that we feel because of a life event is not forever. It might always affect us on some level. Let's face it, a bereavement will always affect us in different ways over a long period of time. But eventually the acute pain will pass. So as Martin Seligman said, the 3 Ps of resilience are actually really designed to give you perspective. And perspective is pretty much the most important thing to our mental health, especially when we're feeling that everything is out of control. I also want to talk to you about the circle of influence. This is Stephen Covey back in 1989. Stephen Covey, again, really worth looking at this in some detail when you get the chance. But I've been using this with teams, actually, and it's interesting. I used this with a team of 10 a couple of weeks ago who were really struggling with the amount of customer agitation that they were facing. So I asked them all as a team to sit down and to use this model. What I can control, what I can influence, what I can't control. These are the 3 pillars of really actually feeling a little bit more empowered. Now, human beings, what we tend to do is we go from that place of, oh my God, I can't control X, Y, Z. And that's the wrong way to do it. As Covey suggests, you must always start from the inside out. What can I control? So in this case, what we'll see, of course, is I can't switch off from work at the end of the day. Now, this is something that has been brought to us many times, and we use this only as an example, but it just goes to show that actually you can switch off at the end of the day, but you have to map it out. You have to know what you're up against. So when we talk to teams, one of the things that you'll find is that diversity on a team, you'll have maybe a team, different views, different experiences, different viewpoints, different triggers. What you can actually do is to work, individually is helpful too. But if you've got a team issue, use this with your team. Because the whole point about this is feeling empowered. A lot of us don't feel like we've got a lot of control right now, but the important thing is to remind ourselves every day of what we have control over. You'll have access to a template. Now, I would argue, again, use this with your teams, use it with yourself, use it with your partner. I think it's an important thing to remember that we are much more in control than we think we are. Also want to find out what your COVID superpower is. So one of the things about COVID superpower is, I was talking to a 7-year-old recently, and she reeled off about 10 new things that she's learned as a result of COVID. And I think that's incredibly exciting. If we can do that with children, then we should be able to do that with ourselves. You might have mastered a skill that you never thought you could do before. You might have realized how incredibly strong you are. What kind of role you play in your family and how important you are to them. We all have a superpower, and the point about COVID is that it's taken away a lot of us, but what it has done is give us an opportunity to really dig deep and to understand just how amazing we are. So I would argue, ask yourself, what's your COVID superpower? What are you incredibly proud of doing over the last 7 months? And keep doing it. I'll remind you again, Retail Trust is here 24/7. It's confidential. And, the point is that a problem shared is a problem halved. And I think the reality is that we're all struggling in our own different ways. As I said before, at the end of the day, I think that the last 7 months has encouraged more people to talk about well-being than I've seen certainly in the last good few years. So this has given us a great gift. Reach out, call us anytime, as you'll see the details are up there. And let me just remind you again that your track record of getting through stuff is 100%. Keep it that way.